Welcome back to another edition of Tuesday's Thought. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Good to see you, even though I can't see you. So tonight's topic is on the subject of transitions. So I recently had an opportunity to hear a very compelling story about a particular animal. And that particular animal was the eagle. Now, I was listening to this fascinating story. Of course, through subsequent digging and doing my own research, I realized that it wasn't actually factual. It was more in the line of a myth. But there were some really, really valuable nuggets that I took from it that I wanted to share tonight, because it really speaks to transition points in our life. And I thought that they were so relatable and somewhat like an analogy that we could really use to apply some good, solid truths and insights for living. So I want to share that with you tonight. So the myth about eagles goes a little something like this. Basically, the total lifespan of an eagle could be up to 70 years. However, once the eagle hits its 40th year, there are a series of very important things that the eagle has to do. And if it does it, then it can potentially extend its life for up to 30 years. And that's where you get the 70-year long lifespan. So here are the things that it would have to do according to this myth. So it flies up into a very high mountain alone. Once it's up in the mountain, it actually hits its beak against the rock until it falls off. So it gets a really hard surface and starts like literally pounding its beak until the beak falls off. The next thing it does is it will start plucking out its feathers, okay? And it implies that, some of the feathers might have been worn and so on, worn as far as the wear and tear of life, so it plucks its feathers. It also then plucks out its talons, okay? So its claws on its feet, it plucks those out. Now, all of these things are done with the view of renewal, right? So pulling out its feathers with the view of renewing a fresh set of feathers. All of these things, as I say, are done to very important parts of the eagle's anatomy, all three. The beak, the talons, the feathers that cover its wings, those are all things that really help contribute to making the eagle the fierce, majestic predator that it actually is. But if they do those things, it is said that it will result in greater outcomes, so longevity, and as I say, renewal. It has to shed those old things off in order to begin that second phase of its life. Notwithstanding that this was a very interesting story, there were a little bit more details and so on, but notwithstanding that this was an interesting story, as I say, it's not an actual factual thing, but I wanted to highlight a couple of these areas because I found such a profound connection. If we really think deeply about what's actually happening, there is so much of a connection that we can pull from it. So first of all, let's talk about the beak. As I described to you, it literally has to go and ferociously knock its beak on a hard surface, on a rock, until it falls off. That is obviously not a comfortable thing. When you think about that, you think of a lot of discomfort and a lot of pain. And when we're talking about transitions, and I kind of just want to anchor it, when I speak about transition, I'm talking about the various transitions that we have to do through the stages of our lives. Okay, so we move, obviously age is one of the most obvious markers. We move from childhood to then adolescence to early adulthood to senior years and so on, right? But throughout that journey, we encounter various transitions, educationally, academically. Then you move into, relationships and start building your own family, various types of transitions that take place. And if we bring it down sort of on a more micro level, when I look and consider the process of knocking off the beak, as I said, very uncomfortable, very painful, but it's a necessary part of the transition. Sometimes in life, we have to go through experiences that are uncomfortable and that might be painful. Let's think about transitioning in terms of space. You might have to transition out of a particular job or out of a career. You might have to transition to a new city. Been there, done that, right? Transition to new communities. You might have to transition to a new church home. And all of these transitions will sometimes leave you feeling uncomfortable. Some of us may have to experience harder transitions. So the transitions such as the loss of a child or the loss of a loved one, a parent, right? Transitions out of lengthy relationships. And so there's an agony, there's a pain that comes with that level of transition. But in terms of this process, in order for the eagle to experience the renewal and to experience the benefit, it has to decidedly endure this painful process. And so I want to encourage us that even though you might be in a transitional period that feels a little bit uncomfortable, why? Because you're losing your sense of familiarity, or you're losing that particular comfort that you've grown to enjoy in your other community or the place that you've known all your life. Sometimes that discomfort is a necessary part of your growth. It's a necessary part of being able to move to the next level. It's a necessary part of being able to essentially preserve something, preserve that which you've built, preserve life. The second feature that I wanted to really highlight, as I mentioned before, was the feathers, the plucking of the feathers out. Now, these are the feathers specifically that are covering the eagle's wings. And of course, when we talk about eagles, usually you're thinking about, or we hear about it in the context of, how high they can fly and the altitude and how well they can soar up in very, very high heights. But I submit to you that a part of its ability to be able to do so is it's the strength of its wings. I'm told that if you see an eagle spread its wings, it's actually a very wide distance, right? And there's a certain amount of reliance. There's a necessity in those wings in order for it to be able to experience that height. But part of this process, this transitional process, is that they pluck the wings. So legend would have it, they pluck the wings. Why? Because it's necessary to get off some of the weight. Okay, it's almost like a shedding of the weight, because we all know that the heavier the thing is, the less likely it is to soar. You've been in airplanes, for example, and you know that nowadays you have to pay even for the luggage that you're allowed to check, but that's a separate point. That's a Tuesday's thought for another Tuesday. But generally speaking, there is a limit to the weight capacity that an airplane can carry, because the airplane is going to be ascending. And so it is. As we journey through life, as we move through life, there are times where the heaviness, the weight of what it is that we carry, the baggage, has to be shed in order for us to experience higher heights, in order for us to come up higher, in order for us to move to higher levels. As we transition, we've got to let go of some, and I'll just call it for what it is, dead weights. Sometimes it's dead weight. Sometimes it's weight that really is of no value, of no benefit. Hurts from the past, right? Negative experiences, trauma, right? Again, the process is not necessarily a comfortable one, I would imagine, of having to pluck that out, but it's essential. runners, when you consider sprinters, it's a reason why they're dressed as lightly as they're dressed. Why? Because too much weight is going to inhibit their potential. And so it is as we transition. There are things that we may have accumulated over the course of the journey of life that there comes a point in time where it's about time to let it go. We've got to shed that. We've got to release it in order for us to experience the beauty of the other side. And so, as I say, there's so much that we can pull from this process. I'm not going to go to the other points that I mentioned. In fact, I think I'll save that for next week. But what I'd like for us to leave with tonight is the process of transition is a necessary part of our life. Now, you may be watching in your 20s, you might be in your 30s, 40s, whatever the age bracket that you're in. Recognize that where you are today is not, or at least it should not be, the same place you were at, say, in your teenage years as a high schooler. So the things that might have been a source of stress or anxiety or might have been problematic for you as a teenager really should not be the same things that have you down as a 30, 40, 50, and so on year old person. Why? You've grown through, you've navigated through a few things, you've had some experiences. And so the fact that so-and-so doesn't like you, or the drive to sort of want to be popular in the eyes of a group or a group of people, these things really start to not matter the older you get, the more mature you get. As I say, it's a big deal when you're younger, but as you move through life, as you journey through life, as you transition through these stages and phases, there are things that are no longer as relevant or are no longer as significant as they once were. And so I want us to point up as we looked at just those two quick examples. As I said, I'll probably touch on a few more in the next segment. But just as we look at those few examples, draw from them those two things. Sometimes you must experience a necessary discomfort in order to shed that thing which needs to be renewed as you move to a new phase or as you transition to the next stage in your life. And secondly, in order for you to fly high, in order for you to soar, in order for you to mount up, in order for you to experience your full potential, there are some weights, there are some things that need to be plucked away. Okay? Some things that are gonna weigh you down, that it's time that you say, you know what? I'm gonna lay this burden down and I'm gonna keep on running on to see what the end is gonna be, as the songwriter said. I wanna just quickly leave you with this text, going to the book of Ecclesiastes chapter 3, bringing home again this idea of transitions and just the fact that we will experience those along our journey at various, and it's going to be different. It might be different for different folk, different strokes for different folks. So my season of transition might not be the same as yours as in terms of from an age perspective. We all have a different pace in life, right? And we'll all experience things differently and at different times. But one thing's for sure is that transitions are necessary. And transition, by its very definition, implies something that occurs over the course of time. So it's not an instantaneous, it's not a one and done, but to transition means to gradually shift. And so we'll see those types of gradual shifts, just like the eagle, according to this myth, has to gradually shift once it reaches its 40th year into a phase of renewal. So too do we. And so the writer in Ecclesiastes chapter 3 and verse 1 pronounces this very profound thesis, this statement. For everything, there is a season, a time for every purpose under the sun. Everything has a time. Everything has a season. Of course, you can read the entire passage on your own and you'll see that the various references to things like time to be born and a time to die, so the opposites and so on. But the essence of it is that times and seasons are allotted to every transaction, everything that we see around us. There's a time and there's a season. So recognize the season that you're in, and perhaps it's a season for transition. And in those two circumstances that I highlighted for us, It is to remind us that we can embrace it. We should be prepared for it, but we can embrace it in spite of how it might make us feel sometimes, in spite of how uncomfortable we might become. It's necessary in order for us to see that new season, to see that new phase. Thanks so much for tuning in tonight. As always, my prayer for you is that the peace of God will be with you. Until we see you again next time, may the Lord bless you real good.